For this session, we will automate your depreciation. So last meeting, we talked about automation of your inventories. Now we talk about automation of depreciation. In automating your depreciation, this particular Excel file automation will help us compute for the amount of depreciation expense, the accumulated depreciation, including the carrying amount of the property, plant, and equipment. This helps us especially if we have too many fixed assets in the company or in the business, so we can keep track of those items using our Excel automation. Now, how do we automate your depreciation? So the problem here in your automation of depreciation is the automation of your depreciation expense, the accumulated depreciation, and your ending carrying amount. So these items are very important as to your fixed asset. Why? Because your carrying amount will be divided into two items. So your total initial carrying amount or the cost of the asset will be divided into two items, particularly the ending carrying amount and the accumulated depreciation. And your accumulated depreciation accumulates based on the amount of the total depreciation expense recorded. That's why we need to account all of this. So to properly account of all of these items, what we do is we create a tabular format for our depreciation. So what is our tabular format? So if you try to look at this, our tabular format have here your year, beginning carrying amount, depreciation expense, accumulated depreciation, and your ending carrying amount. So we will dwell on those items as we go through our discussion. So what is your cost or carrying amount again? That is the acquisition price of your property, plant, and equipment pursuant to your PAS 16. Ending carrying amount, this is the subsequent measurement of your property, plant, and equipment pursuant again to your PAS 16. How about your depreciation expense? Your depreciation expense depends on the depreciation method that is applied to your fixed asset or property, plant, and equipment. Some of the common items we place are straight line, we have double declining balance, and then we have your sum of the year's digits. So we will dwell and talk about automation of your depreciation, and we create or try to create a depreciation table, which now helps us to make use of our different depreciation methods. So what is our requirement here in automating your depreciation? So the requirement here is we must have an input data, which now caters for the cost, salvage value, useful life, and the depreciation method use. Number two, the method should display a drop-down menu showing the different depreciation methods, which we will use. We will only use straight line, double declining balance, and sum of the year's digits. And then lastly, the file should automatically compute the yearly depreciation, yearly accumulated depreciation, and ending carrying amount until the end of the useful life of the property, plant, and equipment. Okay, so that is what should be finished or completed as we go through this discussion this afternoon. So let's start and we try to recreate these items. So first, in automating your depreciation, this will be our main screen. So the first one, we should have an input entry or input data entry, which has your asset ID, cost, salvage value, useful life, and then your method. Asset ID here represents the ID of the property, plant, and equipment. So one of the internal controls in actual practice is that there is a property, plant, and equipment ID or property, plant, and equipment tag. So we place those tags under your asset ID. If we don't have an asset ID, we can place the particular type of property, plant, and equipment. So for example, furniture and fixtures, tables and chairs. So we can place them under your asset ID if we don't have your asset ID. But in actual practice, we have your asset ID as an internal control to properly identify your different fixed assets or property, plant, and equipments. Normally, they are shown using a sticker. They are shown using a sticker. So that sticker will be placed in your different property, plant, and equipment. So whether it is placed at the back of the computer or at the bottom of the computer table or chairs, etc., or back of the chairs, you can see those asset ID or asset tags in the form of a sticker. Now, part of your input data is your cost, of course. You know cost as the acquisition cost of the property, plant, and equipment. And then we have here your salvage value. Your salvage value, of course, is the amount that we expect to receive at the end of the life of the property, plant, and equipment. And then we have your useful life, the economic life of your property. And then your method, which we said a while back, that should be either SL, double declining balance, or SYD. And then after we finish creating your input data, we will create also your depreciation table, which shows the following. First, the year. So this year is a sequence of this is a sequence of the useful life of the asset. So 1 up to the useful life of the asset. Beginning carrying amount. So the beginning carrying amount of the asset as of a particular date. Depreciation expense, the amount of depreciation expense. Accumulated depreciation, this is your total accumulated depreciation from year one up to the useful life of the asset, and then the carrying amount or the ending carrying amount. Next, after creating your depreciation table, we create now your data validation, particularly a drop-down menu. So we will create a drop-down menu here. As you can see, there is a drop-down menu. We create a drop-down menu. So in that drop-down menu, it must show straight line, double declining balance, and then SYD. And then after finishing your input items, we can now automate the depreciation table. Okay? So that's how we go through in discussing your automating depreciation. So first, we create your input data. The following are your input data: asset ID, your cost, salvage value, useful life, and your method. And then we can also have a depreciation table, which shows your year, beginning carrying amount, depreciation expense, accumulated depreciation, and your ending carrying amount. And then last and third, we create a data validation, a drop-down menu, which shows straight line, double declining, and SYD. So as you can see, we created here a drop-down menu. And then lastly, we automate the depreciation table. So there's no problem as to step one and step two. For step one, we just need to create input data. Step two, we place the column headers of your depreciation table. In step three, we need to create a data validation using a drop-down menu. So how do we create a data validation using a drop-down menu? So the first one you need to do is go to Data tab. So click Data tab. After we click your Data tab, under your Data tab, we have here your data validation. So under Data tab, click Data Validation. And then, after clicking Data Validation, there will be a pop-up menu. So there will be a pop-up menu for data validation. And then for the fourth one, click list. Okay? Click list and select source. So how do we select source? So from this one, we click this item, we select the source of our data validation. So our source must contain SL, double declining balance, and then sum of the year's digits. After that, we now click OK. Right? So that's how we create your drop-down menu. So again, first go to Data tab, and then click Data Validation, and then click the list under your data validation, and click the source, which must contain SL, DDB, and SYD, and we click OK. So that's how we create your drop-down menu. So we're done with the first three steps. What are the first three steps in creation of your depreciation or your automating depreciation? First, we must create your input data. We already discussed how to create an input data. Second, we create your table for depreciation or depreciation table, which are your column headings. Third, we create a data validation, which is your drop-down menu. And then lastly, we now automate depreciation. Okay? We now automate depreciation. So how do we automate your depreciation? What are the important functions that we will use to automate your depreciation? So here are the different functions to use to automate our depreciation. So first, we have again your if function. You already know what is an if function. It allows you to make logical comparisons between a value and what you expect. So again, you compare between a particular value to another, and it will give a true or false value. Next, you have your row function. Your row function returns the row number for a cell or range. So what is the use of your row function? Your row function is a helper to create the year. Okay? We will use the row function later as a helper to create the year. So row function tells you or returns the row number for a cell or range. So for example, you click C1. It will return the number of that row. So it will return 1. Okay? So if you place row C1, the return value should be 1. Why? Because it should return the row number for a cell or range. So if it is placed under C1, the number there is 1. Therefore, what is returned is 1. That is how your row works. Again, we will make use of your row as a helper to create our year. Next, we have your Ddb function. So what is your Ddb function? Your Ddb function is your double declining balance function. Of course, we will make use of this Ddb function to compute for our double declining balance, depreciation, carrying amount, and your accumulated depreciation. So Ddb function calculates the depreciation of an asset in a given period using the double declining balance. Okay, so again, Ddb function will compute for the amount of our double declining depreciation. So what is our syntax in your Ddb? So the syntax of your Ddb is Ddb open parenthesis cost, which is the acquisition cost of the asset, salvage, which is the salvage value of the asset, life, useful life of the asset, and period, that is our helper. Period is our helper. Take note of that. Okay? Period is our helper. So if that is year one, our helper will be year one. How about the factor, sir? Factor changes the DDB rate. What do we mean by changing the DDB rate? Because double declining balance, our default rate is 200%. Our default rate for DDB is 200%. Therefore, if you want to change that default rate, you must place a factor here. For example, you want to change it at 150 or 300, meaning you have now 150 declining balance, 300 declining balance if you change the factor. Okay, again, what is the use of your factor? To change the default of your declining balance. Next, we have your SYD function. So your SYD function, of course, is your sum of the year's digits. So sum of the year's digits returns the sum of the year's digits depreciation of an asset for a specified period. So if you want to use sum of the year's digits, of course, your depreciation method must be SYD. So what is our syntax here? The syntax is SYD, again, cost, which gives you the cost of the asset, salvage, the salvage value of the asset, life, the useful life of the asset, and period, again, this will be our helper, okay, based on row later on. The period or the current year. And of course, we will make use of your other basic mathematical functions such as plus, minus, multiply, and your divide. Since we are ready and we know the different functions to use, we can now automate our depreciation table. So how do we automate your depreciation table? So again, in your year, we will make use of your row, and then we will get a helper. So row will be used to get a helper. Of course, it will start at 1. So you know now, you need to choose row which gives of 1. So let's say row A1 gives of 1. However, our problem here, it must also end at the specified useful life. Okay? It must also end with the specified useful life. So how do we do that? Okay? So how do we do that if ever we want it to end at the specified useful life? So first, of course, we need to compare our row with our useful life. Okay? We need to compare our row to our useful life. So compare the row to the useful life. So again, what do we need to do under your year? Under your year, we need to get a row helper, and we need to compare that to the end of the specified useful life of the asset. Okay? So we need to do that so that at the end of this, so for example, you place your useful life is 10. It will only display up to 10 years. Beginning carrying amount is, of course, for year 1, it is equal to your initial cost, which is under B3. And then your depreciation expense depends whether that is straight line, double declining balance, or SYD. How about your accumulated depreciation? Your accumulated depreciation is equal to your beginning carrying amount less depreciation expense. No. Accumulated depreciation is equal to your depreciation expense plus prior year depreciation. Carrying amount is equal to your beginning carrying amount less accumulated depreciation. How about in year 2? Your year 2, we have your beginning carrying amount again. Your beginning carrying amount will, of course, come from E7. So from this one, it will transfer to this. And then your depreciation expense again differs depending on the method. Accumulated depreciation is still equal to your depreciation expense plus prior year depreciation. And then we have your carrying amount. Again, that is equal to your beginning carrying amount. So from this one, less your accumulated depreciation. So those are the items we need to automate so that we can compute for your automatic depreciation. So again, we only follow 4 steps here. What is the first step? Our first step is, of course, to create your input data. Next, we create your column headers. Third, we need to create a data validation. And then lastly, we automate the depreciation method. Okay? So those are the items that we will do this session. So let me share my screen and we try to automate using an Excel. So we have here your Excel screen. So under your Excel screen, again, we follow the 4 steps in creation or automation of your depreciation. So first, we place here your asset ID. And then we create your other input data, cost, salvage value, your useful life, and then your depreciation method. Then, after your input data, we create your column headings. So your year, beginning carrying amount. We also have your depreciation expense. We also have your accumulated depreciation. And lastly, we have your ending carrying amount. So we're done with 2 steps. Okay. Let's just format these items so that at least we know that these items are our input data. Now, after our input data, we're ready to create our data validation. So in our data validation, remember, it must present 3 choices. First, SL for straight line. Next, we have double declining balance for DDB and SYD for sum of the year's digits. So what we do, we first click the cell under your method. So that is cell B6. And then we click data tab. And under data tab, we have here your data validation. We click that data validation. In the pop-up menu, we click list and we select now the source. So our source will be these 3 items, SL, DDB, and SYD. After selecting the source, we click OK. So as you can see, we have now a drop-down menu here in our method. So it shows now the 3 drop-down menus or 3 items under our drop-down menu, SL, DDB, and SYD. After that, we are now ready to automate our depreciation. So first, under your year, we said we need to compare a helper, which is the row, versus the useful life. So we can make use of an if function here. So if our logical test is our row, so we select any row which starts with 1. So I selected row A1 is less than or equal to our useful life. Then If the value is true, we select the row itself. If the value is false, it should not present anything. Okay? So again, if the value is true, it should present the row itself, row number. If not, it should not present anything. Okay? So that is our row function for year. Again, we need to compare we need a helper to give us a row value versus the useful life. And whichever is lesser there, we present it. If not, it will not present anything. Next, beginning carrying amount. Our initial beginning carrying amount is the cost of the asset. For our depreciation expense, we have three methods. Again, straight line, double declining balance, and your SYD. So under straight line, our formula here will be cost less salvage value divided by useful life. So that will be our formula later. In your DDB, again, we have the following syntax. First, the syntax of cost. After the syntax of cost, we have the syntax of salvage value, and then the life, and then the period. Sir, what is the period? Remember, we said the period will be used as the helper. The period is the helper. And under SYD, we use the function SYD. And then again, what are the other or what are the items of our syntax? Still, we have cost, salvage value, life, and the period. So that is our syntax. So how do we create our depreciation expense? We create here a multiple if function. We create here a multiple if function. So what is our multiple if function here? So first, if function, if D6 or our method is equal to straight line or SL, then what is the value if ever it is true? The value if true is equal to your cost less salvage value divided by useful life. Take note, since these items are coming from our input data, these are fixed items. These are fixed items. Therefore, we should place here a dollar sign. Okay? So we should have a dollar sign here for our reference. Now, what if the value is false? So we create another if function. So our logical test here again is if ever the method is equal to DDB, then if the value is true, then we create another computation for DDB. So we now use DDB function. First, we create a cost, and then we select the salvage value, and then we select the useful life, and then the period which come from our helper. Take note, anything that comes from your input data must be an absolute reference or a fixed reference. So take note, if ever it comes from B4, B3, B4, B5, and B6, it must be an absolute reference. Okay? And the value, if ever it is false, we use now the function SYD. SYD. So again, cost, we select salvage value again. We select useful life. And then the period will come from our helper, which is under the year. Okay? So that is our function. So why is it value? Because it does not have any value right now. It does not have any value right now. Next, accumulated depreciation. Accumulated depreciation is equal to the sum of all the depreciation expense. Okay. So sum C9 to C9. However, the start of your depreciation expense is the first C9. Therefore, we make it again as an absolute reference. And ending carrying amount is equal to, again, we said the cost less the accumulated depreciation. However, since we have here again from the input data, we make B3 as a fixed item or absolute reference. Then we copy this. Beginning carrying amount will come from your ending carrying amount. And then we have here, we copy just this and this and this. Okay. So we have the following amounts already. However, guys, we want this to be clean, right? We don't want to see these value items here. So what we do is we make another if function. So our if function here is if ever, what we want is if ever there is still a year or there is still a year left here, you display something. If not, you display nothing. Okay? So how do we do that? So we clean this one. We insert another if function. So if the year here displays nothing, you display nothing. If not, display the formula. So that's already clean. In accumulated depreciation, again, if this displays something, or if this displays nothing, you should display nothing. But if not, then we display something. It's still the same. If this displays something, or if this displays nothing, you display nothing. If not, you display something. Okay? Since we already automated those items, we already created an automation, then we're ready to autofill these items. Let's autofill until 30. Okay. So since we autofilled them already, let's place the cost. Let's say 100,000. Uh, Salvage value is, let's say useful life is 10 years. And then our salvage value is 5,000. And our depreciation is straight line. What happened here in our formula? Why does it not display? If row A1 is less than or equal to, okay. I forgot to make this one a fix. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. I forgot to place an absolute reference in cell B5. So I place an absolute reference now in cell B5. That's why our formula now is clean. I keep repeating a while back that if ever the cell references come from these items or from this input data, what we do is we put an absolute reference, right? Okay, so we have your SL. So see, it computes the whole value or the whole depreciation table until the 10th year. And at the end of 10th year, what is left is the amount of salvage value, which is 5,000. How about if we choose SYD? Oh, if that is SYD, do we have a problem with our SYD? Okay. We have a problem in our SYD. Why? Because again, I forgot to place a fixed reference in our cells. Okay, there you go. Okay, now it's clean. Next, for accumulated depreciation, it automates everything. Let's say this is 5 years SYD, so it will only give you 5 years. See, that's what's nice in this particular mm, example. So let's say DDB. Sir, why is it on our DDB we have 776 here left? Because if you know DDB, it does not follow the actual year. It follows depending on the percentage you reduce out of the ending carrying amount. So it does not follow usually the useful life. So sometimes if the useful life is 5 years and the DDB percentage is higher than what you need to remove out of that asset, then whatever is left, you need to amortize it still. Okay? So that's the problem with DDB. Although, as you can see in DDB, it automatically computes it still. So DDB, SYD, straight line. So that's the beauty of this automation. You can already automate whatever asset. Per asset, you can create one sheet or one worksheet, and then you can input those data, cost, salvage value, and useful life. Again, do not make the mistake I made. If ever it comes from these items, cost, salvage value, useful life, and method, please always make it an absolute reference. And that's it for our automating depreciation.